Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Men of Liberty. I'm your host, Sam, and today I have a very special guest, a very close friend of mine, and we previously worked together at Two Men in a Truck, Richard O'Neill.
I'll wave to the camera.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, cool.
Richard and I are going to be discussing some random topics, but mainly the idea of where morals should be in the United States and around the world, especially amongst our leaders. And this is just going to be very broad. It's not pointing to anything in particular. It's more of a fun time podcast where we wouldn't consider too serious, but important. So, Richard, why don't you go ahead and tell people about yourself there, buddy?
Alrighty. And to temper expectations, I am not very smart, but I will contribute my best. My name is Richard O'Neill. I am 31 years old. As Sam has said, we worked together previously at Two Men in a Truck, where we forged a really great friendship that has continued through the years. So I'm very happy to be part of this. About myself, I'm just an average guy. I work at a warehouse for Target, driving a forklift around. I'm a recently licensed real estate agent, so I'm also getting into that field. And for personal hobbies, I love to write music. I love to write my own short stories and literature, and I love to read. So any typical everyman person you can expect to see out in the world, just riding their bicycle, grocery shopping, just living their life, their ordinary life, I'm that person. So no one exceptional, maybe a little like you or a little like someone you know.
Said, man. Very, very, very well said. So, Richard, when I first reached out to you, one of the reasons I did is because we used to have long conversations because we were actually on the same team at Two Men in a Truck for a while. So he was the driver and I was the second man on the ship. And we used to have long conversations, and some of them were about morals and how constantly people who have had influence in the world would have this like battle, and people who actually wrote about it, right? That like there was this like good versus evil, and they'd constantly battle like on the inside, but it was always the people with the worst like evil side that they realized that ended up doing something really like big, and so I just thought, you know what, why don't we try and bring a little bit of that here, because I used to talk to you about my personal struggles and morals when I was younger, and I struggled with being loyal, and I struggled in pornography and things like that, and how it kind of swayed my behavior a little bit. And I used to talk to you about that constant tug of war. You remember that?
I do.
Yeah, and I was like, you know what? I think we could bring some light on that subject, be productive, and whip it all into this big segment. So, we'll go ahead and we'll start out with the United States. There's this battle between people who believe or go for Trump and those who are pro Biden or whatever. Morally speaking, who do you think has the stronger morals there, Biden or Trump?
I guess the first question is, from me back to you, is, when we're discussing morals, I guess the question is, what is the foundation of morals that we're expecting? I think with the nature of morality, as we've seen throughout history, throughout various books that I've personally read, the way society views morality, what we view as strong morality or poor morality, will change with the expectations of that culture. I'm not a history buff by any means, but, to give a very simple example that I can try and pull up, I think most people would agree today, murder is wrong. If someone wrongs you, you do not murder them. That is morally unjust. But in some societies predating our own, if somebody wronged you, murder was not only considered just, you wiped out their entire family. It was generational warfare. And not to go too far into that tangent there, but I guess when we ask about morals between Trump as an individual or Biden as an individual, what morals are we speaking of? What morals should we say that we agree to first, that a leader should be aspiring to? I think Trump's unabashed support of the United States as a country is what all leaders should aspire to. If you're a leader of your particular country, if you're a leader of China, of the United States, of Canada, wherever you happen to be, the citizens under your leadership are the people that you owe your loyalty to, and I believe those are the ones that you should give your full responsibility towards. Whether Trump actually performed that duty and that responsibility or he simply gave lip service to it is something I don't know I have enough insight to provide, but I think that's been a big debate around him as a figure. With Joe Biden, I have nothing for or against Joe Biden. I think that poor man's just not entirely there anymore. I was actually very interested in seeing a lot of the Democratic candidates when they were having those 14 plus people debates. And I am still shocked that Biden is supposedly the one who pulled through. I liked Andrew Yang. I liked Pete. I forget his last name. Was it Buttigieg? Buttigieg. I liked him very. I thought he was a good speaker. And I thought there were some fresh faces, new blood, potentially new and creative leadership for our country that just got pushed away so that we could bring in someone who was familiar but possibly not very good. So if I had to establish those morals, now that I'm rambling and on a tangent, I would say as a leader, even though we are, as a world, moving towards a very interconnected society, easily referred to as globalism, I would still think that your primary responsibility should be to the American people first if you are an American leader. In terms of the lip service granted, I think Biden and Trump were actually equal in that regard. I saw Biden say plenty of things where he wanted to put America first. I'm not entirely sure either of them did that in practice. So I don't know if I could say either one was superior to the other. And I guess I'll leave it there because else I'm just going to keep going.
Yeah, no,
What you say to that?
that's well put. And that was a good idea to find the balance between the question because it was a very broad question. You know, what are the morals we're looking for? Are we looking for, you know, the patriotic morals, or are we looking for the, you know, like to the T, like Bible morals, you know? And I think both of them have crap for morals when it comes to like biblical morals, like be a good person, be good to people around you. I think Trump is a bit of a bully when it comes to his words, and I voted for him, but I'm very critical of him as well. He, I think, as a patriot, day one, he was America first. He wanted to start, you know, he wanted us to be independent here, relying on our own resources versus China or somebody else. I feel like Biden, and this is just my opinion, judging off of his behavior and his long career in politics, is he has failed on both, from what I can see. He's really awkward. Numerous accusations of his hands-on, especially amongst kids, just weird. I mean, you've obviously seen that. You're chuckling.
I've seen all the memes. I don't know if I've watched it all, but yeah, I've seen it.
It's pretty funny. I mean, not for the kids that are there, but us looking at it, right? So it's hard to say. I don't agree with Biden's agendas. I don't agree with his political view at all, right? And I agree with you. I feel like he's a poor old man that should be retiring and hanging out with his family, but instead he's up there like a puppet. Feel bad, but I think both of them have failed miserably when it comes to morals, like you know, do unto others as you would want them to do unto you, you know, things like that. But when it comes to politics, I feel like Trump has surpassed Biden as a patriot.
Yeah. And I think one thing I think Trump would be superior to Biden is he definitely did stoke that sense of nationalism. And you know, in the world we live in today, as I mentioned earlier, as we become used to being an interconnected society, people from various countries interacting with one another simultaneously, instantaneously across the internet, I've noticed that the word nationalism has pretty much been used as a pejorative or an insult. This notion that if people become patriotic for the superiority of their own country, they are automatically on the quote-unquote wrong side of history. I don't necessarily feel that's right or wrong. I definitely see some people who take it a little too far, you know, America first, burn everybody else. I don't think that's the right notion to take. To go on a tangent again, there's a French author I like very much. His name is Michel Houellebecq. I think that's how you pronounce his name. But he has written a lot of fiction, a lot of novels predicting this rise in nationalism. He was also very pro-Trump. He told some American interviewers that Trump was the best president we had, and people, of course, were very upset with him for that. And I just lost my train of thought. What was your last comment before I started? I was building towards something, and then I lost it when I went to Michelle.
Well, talking about the French author.
Oh, you know what? I know what I want to say. How's about this? Rather than focus on Trump and Biden, I think the big question we have to ask in regards to morality, the world will morality and ethics will change as the reality of the world in which we live changes. When we had smaller countries, smaller societies, we could have a far more focused and integrated community. But as technology has enabled all of us to speak together, such as you and I sitting here and being able to broadcast this conversation to strangers who either want to comment on it or participate, um, we find that our idea and our notion of how we should interact with each other and interact with people who are miles, millions of miles, thousands of miles away from us, but being affected by our actions should change. So rather than it being focused on Trump and Biden specifically, it should be should the leaders of the future be focused more on protecting their own country, which may simply be an idealistic notion at this point, or should they focus on ensuring that their country is successfully integrated into the world as a whole? What are going to be the strengths and the faults of that fallout? Just to throw some random scattershot ideas into this idea, we all know about China's social credit system. And a lot of people have said, oh, that's terrible, that's disgusting, we would never allow that. But in the way that we act today across Twitter, social media, Facebook, etc., we have something of that nature already building in the United States. If we dislike somebody, we will gather our anonymous friends from the internet, find out where they live, find their job, and just launch a blitzkrieg until they are no longer employed.
Yeah, actually, we did a segment last week on
Right.
the ESG scoring systems, and it actually is happening here in the United States amongst like the big banks and stuff.
Oh, really?
It's literally in their system. So that's
Okay.
interesting you bring that up because that was our last conversation. Very interesting.
Right. And it's one of those things where as technology develops so quickly and alters the reality around us so quickly, we find those of ourselves who have grown up with certain morals finding those morals upended. I think a lot of people are struggling, and a lot of anger and resentment comes from the fact that within the last decade, what many people might have felt to be the ordinary way of the world has been changed by various new groups, various new identities which have come out, various new political movements and beliefs. And as more and more ideas are able to circulate on this giant interconnected, I'd say, canvas of ideas, there's going to be a lot less consistency because there's going to be far more niche communities who are constantly interacting with each other. And by interacting with each other, there's not going to be a common moral framework that we all adhere to. Um, and I think an argument has to be made here: is there simply a new morality that we should aspire to move toward? Or is there simply going to be one group that proves to be more powerful than the rest and enforces their morality on the others? Which many people would argue when the church was in power, the church made sure everybody had to abide by their rules. When Great Britain, was in charge of the world, we all had to, salute the Queen, whatever. The point is, I think morality is such a vague term because it changes so much. And is morality something that is inherent to human nature, that has divine origin, that is immutable? Or is it something that we as human beings create and therefore can alter at our will? And with how quickly technology changes as well, is morality changing just as rapidly? Can any of our political leaders even keep up? Is it even reasonable to expect them to? Is my question. And then I go smoke crack to calm down. I'm joking. I don't smoke crack, kids. Don't do drugs unless you really want to. And don't get caught.
Well put. Very well put. Morals constantly changing, even from history, And there were those who would say that both good and bad with the change, because of people watching morals. Even the last 50 years, pedophilia is something that is slowly creeping into our system as acceptable. Trying to push that, and what if that becomes the next moral thing? I mean, that's a scary thought, huh?
Well, to kind of whirl that back, I am not for it, obviously. But I've seen a lot of when I've listened to a lot of podcasts or seen a lot of conservative speakers, I've noticed a very popular thing for many to say is, well, consider the Greeks, read the Greeks, read the Greek philosophers. Many of them had young male students that they would sleep with, which would be pedophilia. And God, I never thought I'd say this, but again, are the morals going to change where people consider that all right? I think if you're a parent, absolutely not. Yeah, that's a tricky one. That's one I haven't even given a lot of thought to. But since you bring it up and having to be consistent with what I just said, for all we know, that could be considered normal in a decade.
Hope not. That's a
Yeah.
scary thought, huh?
Yeah. I am not a parent, so it's not a concern of mine. And I would never lecture other parents how to raise their kids or how to feel about it. So that's something parents will have to, I know you'll have to encounter as a father. Um, but yeah, I guess the question is what we should ask ourselves as a citizenship as individuals of either this or other countries is ideally who is the leader we are looking for? How does this hypothetical future president, king, general, social activist, whoever they happen to be, how do they see the world and how do they guide us? How do they present a form of leadership that multiple people of various ethical, religious, cultural backgrounds can come together and say, this is someone I believe in and I want to follow their example? Um, one of the great thing about great leaders through history, be the historical Jesus Christ, Gandhi, Martin Luther King, is they were charismatic individuals. Even if their followers did not agree with every single thing they did, these were people who had strong convictions, who were able to show a way forward that people were willing to emulate. And I think so much of our leadership now is based upon competition, about undermining the opposition, making them look worse, that it just leaves a sour taste in your mouth. Even if you are in favor of one political person, you see the tactics that they utilize to get there. And you think, okay, they might be effective, but they're not just. I can't follow them. I can vote for them. Like you said, you voted for Trump, but you were still critical of him. And is it an unfortunate reality that we're not voting for who we like the most, but we're voting for who we like the least? Is there a chance we could get a leader who we say, we like this person, we believe in them? The last time I personally saw everybody circle around a leader was Obama. Like, I remember watching the Democratic nominations, and I was like, guys, he's still alive. They kept invoking his name. Like, what would the great martyr Obama do? I'm like, he's not dead. He's still here. I want to know your vision.
Do you think Obama was a good president?
I was a teenager when he was a president, and I never looked back on it. I think he was a very charismatic speaker. As someone who does like to read a lot, I would read his speeches after the fact, and I noticed he just didn't say anything. Kind of like I'm doing right now. I'm just kind of speaking a lot, but I'm not sure I'm saying anything concrete. Truth is, I don't know. I think if he was good in the sense that he provided an aura of calm and control, which I think a lot of people wanted to feel. Even if Trump was more effective politically and making other countries kind of kowtow with us or stay even with us, I think his rhetoric provoked a lot of anger and resentment within his own country. Again, I'm neither for or against it. I was not personally offended by Trump. I was not like bumping my fist with Trump. When he won, I didn't think he was going to win when he beat Clinton. But when it happened, I wasn't shaking in my boots or crying. I just told my friends, who are all very liberal, I said, guys, look, we have a political process. If you don't like him, just vote him out next year or next election.
Right.
And they did that. So, hey, good for them. Or maybe they didn't. Maybe, all the ballots came in on the mail and whatever. And that's the thing. There's so many different theories. There's so many different ideas. I have so many different friends who are all part of their own communities on Reddit, on Discord, on 4chan, on whatever websites I've never even heard of before. And like I was saying earlier, you have one individual being influenced by various groups, each with their own biases and predilections. Can we all come together under a certain moral framework? And is there a single leader out there who could actually tap into that? There's a really great book called The Decline of the West. It's like 1,000-some pages. It was written by a philosopher. I read like the first 10 because I have a very small brain. But one thing he said in that book that was very interesting to me, he was a German philosopher. He said that we are a country, and I'm going to use his words as country for standing for the whole world. He said as society advances and technological advancements take root in society, we are going to move away from cultural unity. We are going to move away from a sense of unified morality, and we are going to become very intercompetitive. We are going to become very ruthless. We are going to value only what is practical and not what is spiritually nourishing. And the reason I say that is he said, this isn't verbatim, but he said, we are no longer a country that will produce a goat. And if you don't know who that is, he is, I don't know his full name. Last name was Goethe. He wrote Faust. He wrote The Sorrows of Young Werther, very famous German writer. But he said, we are a country that will never produce another Goethe, but we will produce another Caesar. And what he's saying is the world we live in now, we're not producing poets. We're not giving rise to poets, to artists, to spiritually kind people. We're giving rise to ruthless leaders due to necessity. And is that future leader that we want? Are they being born into a world that is even going to nourish a moral character? When all of us look at each other like dollar signs, when basic wages are very poor, when people feel like they got to get on OnlyFans and sell pictures of their feet. I mean, man, I've been putting my feet pics out there for years. That's how I'm eating. I think it's a wider ranging question of, does the world nourish the leaders we're looking for? Are those leaders even possible? And I would say currently, yes. I'd say individuals like you and me sitting here talking, I think we're on the same wavelength. But I think the next generation, such as your child, what are they going to grow up into? I have no freaking idea. I was a teenager over a decade ago, and I never imagined I'd be as interconnected with all these people through TikTok and Instagram and sitting here having a podcast with my friend. It's crazy. And within another decade, what it'll be. Virtual reality is right around the corner, where I'll just be sitting here interacting with people from Japan and fondling them in the virtual reality headspace. I'm making jokes about it, but the underlying sentiment I'm trying to put across is that everything is moving very rapidly, and I don't think morality can keep up, because morality at its nature is supposed to be concrete. It is supposed to be immutable. We do not live in an immutable world. And it is increasingly becoming more and more fragmentary and more, what's the word I'm looking for? I have no idea. I'll say multitudinous. There we go. More and more multitudinous.
I'm hoping that our next generation, my son, hoping that they can grow up, they can make up their own minds. I don't like the idea of things being forced upon children. I did a segment with Juan on critical race theory and how it was being taught in schools, how I disagree with the curriculum itself. And one of the things I greatly disagree with in that, they consider, this is per academia, anyone who is black that has a life partner, anyone who's not of the same color, and they produce children, that those kids, academia, that their ethnic voice is like void. It's canceled. They can't speak on behalf of black race. They call it cultural genocide, the term used. Multiple scholars who are producing material on CRT. That's some people's moral standing, and I thought that was kind of bizarre, and I disagree with it being taught to kids. I feel like it's actually degrading, and I feel they're pro segregation too in CRT.
So just to confirm, make sure I heard that correctly. So basically, the argument is that if there is a child born to a white and a black parent, that child cannot speak on either behalf of, I guess, white or black heritage, because they're not, quote unquote, like a pure breed.
Just black.
Okay.
Yeah.
Huh. I've never encountered that, so I'd have to actually see the words themselves and see what they wrote. But justification to ostracize people from a young age is something I'm not for anyway. But that's why I'm a champion of libraries, where we can all find voices that speak to us. So that's my shameless plug for today. Go to libraries. Okay.
Hopefully we can keep those libraries. I feel like we're entering a almost Nazism type of society where they want to burn stories and not talk about what's real, and anything that's culturally unacceptable in the eyes of the public should be thrown away, and if you agree with it, then you're canceled. Taking down statues of history, and it breaks my heart, because I think, how are you supposed to learn if you're not constantly taught what history has produced? You just hear and that's it. No, like, you should be able to go read, even go see the monuments, and be educated on our history, because there was a lot of bad in our history. There was also a lot of good, and seeing the good combat the bad should be able to teach you, oh, the side should I be on? But then the choice is up to you. You know what I mean? But you should be educated, at least, in my opinion.
Right.
kind of almost crippling these younger generation of kids who don't know the real stories because they can't. They don't teach it in schools anymore. If you were to pick up a history book today versus even 10 years ago, you'll notice it gets thinner and thinner every time. Even about American history, they take so much out. I get my American history from something called Wall Builders. The guy is a Christian founder, but he has original documents from those times. This guy spent a fortune saving these documents and buying them and putting them in places where they can be maintained. And the curriculum that he teaches versus what they teach today in our schools, completely different. They don't teach the religious part of George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Thomas Paine, anybody. Like they just take it out, they throw it out the window, and they make it to be like our forefathers were racist, hateful people that only cared about themselves. And it's bizarre. It's almost like they're trying to shut down the freedom of thought, the freedom of speaking out, and almost being a rebel in a sense, because that's what those people were. The people who stepped out and signed the Constitution, right? Or, not the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, were considered rebels. They were outlaws. They were people that were considered evil, right? And I think that this is just another way to shut down the minds of young kids from ideas like that, to step out of the norm, to stand on what they believe to be moral. It scares me.
Yeah. It's interesting. You had mentioned you said we're entering, I guess you say, with a system similar to Nazism, and then we're talking about school. I don't know if what I'm about to say is true. I will preface this by saying I read a lot. I read indiscriminately, and I usually encounter ideas that I find very interesting, or I make a little note in my journal to look further into later, and then I completely forget the original source, who the author was, what book it was. It's just a scribble of question marks in my journal. But I remember reading somewhere once before that the American public educational system many years ago was actually based upon the Germanic educational system, which was designed to not necessarily ensure individual free thought and expression, but to ensure that one could better adhere to authority and contribute better to their country. So maybe not necessarily related to Nazism. Not all Germans are Nazis, but
Right.
I'd say I wouldn't. When I hear about the educational system getting more and more thinned out, again, I'd have to look at the curriculum myself. Like if I would have to open a current history book and be like, Thomas Jefferson, freaking racist. All right, next page. I'm like, oh, damn, they really changed it up. I would think just the education that we have is pretty mediocre regardless. I went to what is considered one of the greatest public high schools in the United States. I think it was actually Dublin-Scioto High School, was ranked rather highly. Now, the teachers there were phenomenal. Some of the textbooks were a little sparse. I remember that. I was someone who got along with my teachers, but I was very truant because I would skip school so I could go to the library and read instead, where I found a wealth of far more interesting ideas. So I don't necessarily know if it's the books conspiring to sort of steal history away from children. I think it's just a thoroughly unchallenged mediocrity that's been part of our educational system for a while, which is why a lot of people say, well, go to college where you can encourage more free thought. But then that's where a lot of the issues is a lot of these, supposedly, a lot of these professors are very idealistic and trying to impose certain ideas on students. I don't know. I haven't sat in those classes. And I know I keep saying that for each statement, but one of the things I want to shield myself against is saying, this is what I've seen on the internet, this is what I've seen in a headline. I have yet to encounter it in person. So even though it may be true, I don't want to start giving my heated opinions on something that I might not have encountered. I think that might actually be one of the reasons there's so much anger and debate between people through various communities, because sometimes we just see something, but we haven't thoroughly investigated it yet until we feel informed on it. But I get what you're saying. I think we do owe it to children to give them a more thorough education, to instead of say, okay, we're going to sit in history class for 40 minutes, we're going to vomit some lecture at you, even though you're 10 years old and you should be out there playing and naturally learning and organically interacting with the world. I think that educational system as a whole should be upended. I think teachers should be treated better. I think we should incentivize teachers to come to class ready to kick ass, because teachers get paid shit. I remember Mr. Dennis Rogers, my English teacher in high school, was a passionate man about literature. We would read Shakespeare. He would snarl and growl and act out all the parts. And man, he did not get paid for that enthusiasm. He was just an extremely rare breed of human being. Someone who could see past it because he believed in what he was teaching, the written word, and he believed in us. He believed in me. He was a teacher who actually was very kind and wrote nice things about my essays that I would turn in, who would encourage my love for literature. I don't believe it is necessary for all teachers to have that rare quality. I think if we could start at the bottom and say, look, teachers are civil servants, sure, but if we want children to be handled better, if we want them to be taught better, I think we should make sure that the people who we're entrusting with their guardianship should be treated well, in addition to that. But as for the resources themselves, I think plenty of teachers also agree that the textbooks are total dog shit. Like, I know a few teachers. I know some who actually are professors between OSU and Columbus Community State College. A lot of colleges pretty much just treat their professors like garbage, won't give them full-time employment, just give them half courses. The textbooks they're working with are terrible. They themselves are bound to a very rigid curriculum that they can teach. Even if they want to expand outside of it, they can't. And there's also the truth that, there are very young, idealistic college students who are very, let's say, left-leaning, very convinced of their beliefs. And if they encounter a professor who maybe goes against that, who maybe offers an antithesis to that popular idea, they will go out of their way to make life difficult for that professor by complaining about them. And that's just being young and youthful. I'm 31 years old. I was 21 once. I was convinced that everybody was an idiot and I was going to change the world and be a revolutionary. And I have nothing against it when I encounter that sentiment either, because you're young, you're fiery. But you're also, when you're younger, you're not as considerate of towards the other person, how they might have arrived at who they've become. And I know I'm spiraling out of control in a different direction right now, but to go back to what you're saying, I think I would personally say I don't think there's actually a conspiracy of any sort. Or I wouldn't say there's a concentrated effort to deny children an education. I think our education is just very poor, top to bottom, and there are a lot of good-meaning people in it, a lot of them teachers of various political beliefs who agree with you 100%, and they're powerless. Teachers are powerless against school boards. And I guess that comes down, who's the real person in power of making school as horrible as it is for a lot of people?
How would you explain the drop in standards then for schools? And it comes down, I believe, to the curriculum being messed up, being watered down. I'm not talking
true.
really about mathematics.
Yeah, a lot of schools have lowered the standards for a passing criteria, and the answer is I have no idea, because I'm not involved in it. Again, as far as I've read a few headlines, and the most experience I have with this is I have friends and families who are teachers, and I've heard their complaints. I have heard them talk. Some of them are liberal, some of them are conservative, but none of them are either far right or far left. They're very much willing to talk Democratic ideas, Republican ideas, and they're very sensible, loving, kind-hearted people. And when I talk to them about what they want to teaching the kids, they always just shake their head. They're like, we want to teach them better, but we are just strapped. We're handcuffed at times. As for why the standards are lowered, I have no idea. Is that something that the school board pushes through? Is it someone above them?
I think it's a state thing. And because the numbers were so low and they were getting lower, some people believe that there was a racial push for that too, because the majority of the scores that were low were in public schools among people of color. But it's interesting, the theory on that and the why on that. Interesting, and that's where you get the idea that the schools are against people of color, or they're conspiring against them in a sense, and that was to combat that, actually, which was interesting because it hasn't really worked. People are still failing. People are still doing very, very bad, very poorly, especially in the inner cities like Columbus. It's interesting. But topic, where do you stand politically? I've always wondered.
I'm the most boring person in the world. I have not voted since Obama because I told myself I'm going to vote for someone I like. I didn't hate Trump, but I didn't really want to vote for him. And at the time, I thought Clinton was going to win. I think had it come down to push to shove when well, let me answer your first question. Politically, I would say I would say at their ideals, the Republican Party at its best is about the strength of the individual. It says if you're an individual of exceptional discipline and skill, you should not be hampered by others. You should be allowed to spread your wings and put your best foot forward and reap the rewards of that. I think at its ideal, the best of the Democratic Party is to say yes, but we are part of a community, and we as a community should look out for one another. The perverted sides of both of those is a Republican who becomes too powerful and starts crushing everybody beneath them, buying up land, denying blah, 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 blah. The worst of Democratic is just taxing everybody to shit and trying to give away money to people who aren't necessarily doing anything to better the position. If someone put a gun to my head and said, are you more Democratic or Republican? I'd say I'm Republican. But I've never voted Republican. I would say when I read the sentiments and I read the things, my favorite president was Republican. Lincoln was a Republican. He was also batshit insane. I love that guy. All right. I've read so many biographies on Lincoln. That guy was insane. And it was his biographers who made him Honest Abe after the fact. But I would say I'm Republican, having never voted Republican in my life.
Well, it sounds like you're politically standing. You're more of an individualist. Like you vote on the individual entirely, which is I consider myself a libertarian.
Okay.
But
I forgot that was an option. I saw a red flag and the Westerville blue flag, so I thought he's giving me a choice. I can't pick one. I gotta go blue or red right now.
But libertarian, I think, is more towards what I mean. I believe in the freedom of the people, individually. But I vote based on not just the history, but the present actions of the person. You got to watch out for rhinos, obviously. Are you familiar with the term rhino?
I've heard it before, but I've never actually looked into what the acronym stands for.
It's Republican in only.
In name only?
Something like that, yeah.
I think, RINO, Republican in name only.
And they basically just fake Republicans.
Fake Republicans.
Yeah, there's a lot of those out there. And so that's why I never tell people, I'm a Republican or I'm a Democrat, right? I'm like, I vote on the individual. I vote on how they handle things, because there are some Democrats who are more Republican than Republicans, So I think that's a good standing you have. Wise. It's good to look into the individual, to be educated on them, or giving them your vote or their support.
Well, I was gonna say in 2016 when Trump first started emerging on the scene, I was interested in him. I was like, this is unexpected. So I watched some of his interviews and debates, and I was like, my gosh, this guy's just antagonistic. And I could see why people were upset by him, because going back to Obama, even if Obama was doing some heinous things behind the scenes to other countries and to our own country, he presented an aura of calm, which a lot of people like and possibly need. People need a sense of security, even if it's false. I think a lot of our lives are guided along that sense of false security. We have nuclear bombs ready to go off anytime someone loses their mind, but we're like, everything's good. So when I first saw Trump show up on the scene, I wasn't really convinced, but then there was one interview that caught my attention, and they said, you're antagonizing your opponents, you're being very boorish, it's almost as if you're a professional TV personality, so you know how to play the media. And what he responded, and I remember he said, who you are seeing now is someone who understands how the media works. He's like, as a president, I will be a very different man. And I thought, you know what? That was an intelligent response, and I'm willing to give him a shot. So the debates finally happened between him and Clinton, and I wasn't impressed with the very first one. I was like, wow. But then he came back, I think it was for the second or third debate, and it was clear that he had spoken with his team. He had showed a little more poise. He had a little bit more restraint. And I thought, this is a guy who shows ability to change. And I'm like, I'm still not convinced, but he has my attention. And then I think by the final debate, I thought Clinton, she had also prepared. She saw what he was doing. And at the end of that, I was like, you know what? I think I'm going to vote for Clinton. So I was Team Clinton at that point. I had nothing against Trump. I had friends who were going to vote Trump. But, and this is why I ended up not voting, I, like a lot of other fooled people, was watching the media, and they said, Clinton's got this in the bag, 96.8%. And the thing is, I voted once before, and I hated it. I stood in the cold. I stood in for an hour in line. I'm like, this sucks. I don't feel patriotic. I'm just standing here bored out of my mind. Where's the flag and everybody praising? There's people harassing me outside the voting booth trying to give me pins. I'm like, leave me the hell alone. So I was like, you know what? If I thought it was a close race, I'm going to go vote for Clinton. I thought she had it. She obviously didn't. And I was like, okay, Trump won. Cool. I was like, I'll see how he does. I did not immediately hate on him. I said, you know what? I'm going to give him a chance. And now that he's out, I can personally say I think if the worst he did to this country was piss people off with bad words, I don't think he was that awful. I don't love him. I didn't fist bump for him, but I never was convinced he was this evil next Hitler who was going to destroy the world. I don't think Biden's that either. I think Biden just shouldn't be up there. Like, the guy's disintegrating in front of our very eyes, but I have no hatred towards him. But when it came down between Biden and Trump, I just didn't want to vote for either one. I was like, I really do not care who wins between these two. And like I was saying earlier, if a leader arrives where I think I would vote for them, I would go all the way. Had Pete Buttigieg or Andrew Yang been on the ticket, I would have given them my vote. I would have been like, I'll line up for these guys. Worst thing with Yang is he kept going on about universal income, which I think in theory could be okay, but I think he had other great ideas as well. But that was like his number one single on the radio charts that just made him such an easy target for Republicans. And he was so poor in debates too. Like in interviews, he was very intelligent, well spoken. And then in the actual debates where, they were interrupting each other, fighting, sticking their chests out because you have to now, he just sat there with his arms crossed. I'm like, here is a morally righteous man who will never be a leader because he's morally good.
Yeah.
And that brings us back around to the beginning of this conversation. Who's a morally good leader? I think Andrew Yang. Who's a poor leader? Also Andrew Yang. You need to be ruthless. Unfortunately, it's the world we live in. Disney has tricked us all into thinking that there are such things as good kings. There aren't.
Dang
There
Disney.
are good biographers.
Oh man. Off topic. Do you practice any martial arts, or have you, since we had some moments where I tried to teach him some American boxing, and we would spar for a solid, sometimes 5 minutes around.
Sometimes 30 seconds before I had to go hunch over and vomit. So if you guys are waiting, Sam kicked the shit out of me repeatedly. I did my best, though. I like to jog and I like to exercise just for the health aspects of it. But no, I actually briefly got into boxing way before I met Sam, back when I was 21, 22 years old. And I was really enjoying it. The guy was willing to train me, but then I was in a sparring match and we were sparring. We were going through rounds, and then I watched another guy who was a great fighter get his nose broken in front of me. And that's when I realized I'm very vain. I'm not the prettiest guy around, but, I didn't want my nose to get broken, and I realized I would never be a professional boxer. So I was like, I don't want to go that far into this sport. I'm a very bookish person at heart. I like to write. I like to read. So I shadow box for exercise. I'll beat up on a punching bag, but I do not practice any actual technique. If it came down to an actual fight, my winning move is pivoting and running in the opposite direction. My soccer skills are still sharp, man. I will sprint the hell out of there. If Sam's ever mad at me, you'll hear a flap as I run out of this booth.
Well, I wanted to encourage you to maybe try out some traditional martial arts, which isn't a lot of sparring. It's more, you're familiar with the term Shaolin, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
The Shaolin Kung Fu is what I'm actually belted in, but I'm training in right now in MMA. Compete in MMA. I'm supposed to do a Chinese fight called Sancho, but as you know, the Chinese, they deal with COVID a little bit differently than what we do. So the match I was training for, which was supposed to be in April, got canceled. So now I was angry and I was mad. I was like, screw it. I'm just going to do American then. So I went into training in MMA. So I'm doing Thai boxing, which is Muay Thai, and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu with American boxing. And I'm trying to incorporate Shaolin in that as well. Really hard to mix them all up because Shaolin is very like sideways fighting, where you're kind of cutting yourself to the side looking small. Okay. And there's a lot of animal forms. So I use a lot of open palm strikes.
What's the best martial arts for a tiny guy? Because I'm tiny and I feel like I'm only going to fight dudes who are 6'6". What do I do? Like, what's the best technique that allows me to punch him in the nuts? Like, just get a little, there, weak spot. Hit him right there.
That's a good question. Bruce Lee was only like, 130 pounds? About as tall as you two?
Ouch. No, I'm joking.
I mean, I'm just saying. And the guy was one of the greatest martial artists to ever live.
Bruce Lee was pretty cool, not going to lie.
I would encourage you to start out in Shaolin, belt in there. Maybe get like your black belt in Shaolin, then branch off. Learn like some wrestling, or maybe some grappling, like some Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and then like some throwing, judo, guajao, and you already have a little bit of boxing, so you understand 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, etc. Yeah, I would encourage you, in your spare time, look up some places that might teach Shaolin. I know I train in Clintonville, and my training schedule is rigorously now Monday through Saturday.
What are the hours
Um,
for your training schedule?
so for Shaolin, we have Tuesdays, which is 6:30 to 7:30.
Hmm.
Then Thursdays is open gym, which is, I believe, the same time, 6:30 to 7:30.
Yeah, I should look into it because, as we were talking about before we even started the podcast, when I was younger, I used to work out all the time. I loved being in the gym. But as I'm older now, I don't quite have that same momentum that I did in my 20s. And I've noticed that when it comes to exercise, I just prefer, I don't mentally enjoy being in the gym anymore. When I was younger, for me, bench pressing was like meditation. And it wasn't even because I was trying to get big. I just happened to get big naturally because I would love going to the gym to unwind, lifting weights or pushing myself, doing mountain climbers. It was like I entered this sort of Zen period. Now that I'm older and my body's a little creakier, I'm like, ow, 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 what the fuck? Ow, ow. It's not as enjoyable, but I like jogging because I like this sense of perpetual momentum. And one thing I actually like about the warehouse job is I'm just moving all day, so I'm staying in shape. Shaolin, something like that, where it's maybe not necessarily competitive, but about being in tune with your body. I think that's something I'd actually be really interested in. My wife wants me to go do yoga with her. I haven't quite broken down and tried that yet because I feel like I'd be the creepy guy in the back and looking at all the butts, even though I'm actually just shy and just trying to hide in the back. But
There's nothing wrong with that,
I
right?
know. Who doesn't like butts, right? Men and women. We all love them. Um, uh, but yeah, no, I think I would definitely be interested in trying it out. Because, I just don't like lifting weights anymore. I still do it, but like there's no joy anymore. Like I can still do it and I do fine. I'm like, that was a good workout. But before every curl, I was like, yeah, I feel good. Now as I'm older, I'm like, man, this is fucking boring. I want to go eat a cheeseburger or something. So now that I'm in my 30s, I have to adjust how I approach exercise. And I think that's probably a good idea. My friend Deborah, she's about 2 years older than me. She does, what's it called? Ronin?
Oh, Ronin training. Yeah, that's
She
mixed
goes to a
martial
gym called
arts.
Ronin, yeah, and she does like kick-ass weird shit. Like she could kill me if she decided to.
Yeah, those are so the guy I train with, um, in mixed martial arts. His name is Chico Bays,
Uh huh.
and the Thai guy there, his name is Mark. And Chico used to teach at Ronin. But did you see that video of that girl who hopped into Joe Rogan's arms when Joe Rogan was doing? She had won. I think her name was like Vanessa or something in the UFC.
This is all new to me. What? Who
So,
jumped into what?
so this girl in the UFC fought and won some big fight,
Yeah.
and Joe Rogan was in front of her, doing his interview, and afterwards she jumped into his arms. Her name's like Vanessa or something, and she trained with Chico and Mark back at what they used to call, I think, Buckeye MMA,
Uh huh.
and that place was hardcore from what I heard. So Chico has trained with people in the UFC
That's really
or
cool.
gone to the UFC, right? And I was talking to him. I was like, "How hard is it to get into the UFC?" And he was like, "It is hard.
You have to kick a lot of ass.
You have to be, your whole life has to be dedicated to it." So the people who already have like a specific style that they've won in, boxing or wrestling or something like that, usually like a step up. Well, what do I have to do to work your ass off? And I was like, all right, well, maybe we'll see.
Yeah.
But I just thought it was interesting. Ronin, that's a great place to go to learn mixed martial arts. They got great
Yeah,
jujitsu.
she keeps inviting me out. She's like, we should hang out more. You should come over to Rowan so I can kick the shit out of you for all the dumb shit you've said. Because I talk a lot of trash to my friends just for fun. When I'm bored, it's 2 a.m. I jump into the group chat and just start insulting everybody. She's like, come to the sparring match and I will beat the shit out of you for all that.
Well, why don't you start in some Shaolin so you can learn to maneuver around and maybe do some mind tricks,
Yeah. Sounds good.
Hit him with the
Sounds
tiger
good.
claw. But yeah, random off topic. But me and O'Neill, we exchanged notes, which is a martial art term for fighting, sparring, and I enjoyed sparring with him because he was all power. Every shot he threw it with like this intent to knock you down.
Basically, I was a novice and I didn't know what I was like. Why am I so tired after throwing all these haymakers?
So I just step back and wait. It's like, all right, one,
Yeah.
two, there it is, boom, boom.
Yeah.
But I think he'd be a phenomenal martial artist. So check it out if you have time. Just random.
I will. I'll look into it. Thank you.
Sweet.
I've been looking for a new thing to exercise because I realized the gym just isn't doing it anymore.
It gets
I get
boring.
my natural exercise at work anyway. I'm walking around, I'm lifting heavy stuff. I like it. I feel good. Then I go to the gym and I'm just bored. I'm like, ugh.
Plus, it's, you learned some ancient Chinese techniques that you're not going to learn just anywhere. Because our grandmaster was trained by Grandmaster Chong Dong Sheng. Chong Dong Sheng was an international spy. This guy was feared. He was badass. His Shuai Jiao was the greatest in the world. In fact, our team has one world champion, the only American that has ever beaten China at their own game. He
Really?
beat them in Shuai Jiao. So our school is very small and humble. The warriors that they train there is pretty badass. So just something to think about as
Think
that
about it. I'm
you
old and
soaking in the
creaky now,
bag.
like I told you. 25-year-old me will be like, let's do it. 31-year-old me is like, let me smoke some crack first and I'll get back to you. Once again, I don't actually smoke crack, but again, do drugs. I'm sorry. I don't know why I keep saying that.
He's having fun. This is what this is for.
Yeah, I apologize. I have a sense of humor that I think is hilarious when I'm doing it, and then I'll like watch this back later and I'll just be like, why did I say all that stupid crap?
I think this was a productive conversation. I really appreciate you coming out and hashing it out with me. Like I was telling the audience here, this is a very close friend of mine. We haven't seen each other in a while, but he's one of those friends where you can literally message him 3 years out from the last time we've talked, and we'll hit it off like we've been talking for every day for those 3 years. Very close friend of mine, someone I respect and appreciate. So, O'Neill, thank you, sir, for being here. Why don't you go ahead and tell the audience about your business, and if you want to throw out some of your personal info, or we can put it in the description below. But I want to make sure you get your shout out.
Oh, cool. Well, first of all, thank you for having me on here. This is my first experience doing something like this, and it was very fun and productive, so thank you. I actually had a lot of fun. Once again, my name is Richard O'Neill. If you or someone you know happens to be looking for a home or selling a home, I am also an agent with HR Realtors, part of the Jeff and Kim Christensen team. You can call or text me to get some advice at 614-432-9490, and I would love to talk to you. Or if you just want to insult me for some of the comments I made today, please do. I'll insult you back, and we can keep each other company till 2 in the morning, trading insults and memes. Thank you.
Right on. As always, people, I am your host, Sam. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope everyone is blessed. We'll see you next time. Adios.